Live only on DAZN, he silenced Britain's best. Usyk, the Brit breaker, but now the dynamite is ready to explode. One night, one shot, and undisputed. Usyk versus Dubois 2, July 19th. Right now at DAZN.com/boxing.
So obviously last night we had Harlem Eubank versus Jack Catterall, and look, we all seen the fight. It wasn't compelling viewing, to say the least. And yeah, we kind of knew that. I mean, on paper, both guys, stylistically, you knew this was going to be a bit of a dud. So I kind of got the fight I expected, which was not going to be great. But look, I've already done a review of that. This is not a Jack Catterall review or anything like that. It's more to do with the fact that Turki Alashik, of all people, who was clearly watching that fight, was really not best pleased. And it's an interesting one. You know, I've seen a lot of people online agreeing with Turki. I've also seen a lot of backlash to what Turki said about Jack Catterall versus Harlem Eubank. And for those who don't know, he basically said words to the effect of, this isn't a Tom and Jerry fight, this is a Jerry and Jerry fight, and that this isn't boxing. Well, in one sense he's wrong, because technically, yeah, that really is what boxing is. It is theoretically hit and not get hit. It is the sweet science which Jack Catterall was putting on display. But I get where he's coming from, in a sense of he doesn't want, like, I'll give you an example. Lennox Lewis was brilliant at hit and not get hit. Lennox Lewis was one of those guys where he just seemed to master the sweet science. He would, use his jab. If he was fighting a shorter fighter, he would keep them at arm's length. But what did Lennox Lewis also do? He would fight to keep the opponent off of him. He would throw his right hand. He would left hooks go whenever he needed to. Remember, he was letting the left hook go quite well against Vitaly Klitschko. But primarily, he was a right-hand puncher. But what's the word there? He was a puncher. He was actually letting shots go. Pernell Whitaker, defensive genius. Absolutely brilliant to watch from a defensive point of view. But he was also someone who would let shots go. He would throw a lot of shots. He was entertaining to watch. And that's what Turki is getting at. So it's weird when I see a lot of fans, come onto that post Turki made with a lot of backlash, saying, oh, but the fighters are doing blah, 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 blah. At the end of the day, boxing is still an entertainment sport at the end of the day. Was I entertained by Jack Catterall, Harlem Eubank? No. No, I wasn't. Harlem Eubank, Jack Catterall, I was more entertained when I watched Johnny Fisher versus Dave Allen. You're talking about two fighters. One of them in Johnny Fisher is just a gimmick, and the other one in Dave Allen is barely British level. Barely. But was that a more entertaining spectacle? It absolutely was. Because both guys just went in there and just decided, right, we're not the most talented, but let's see what we can do. And it ended in a knockout. It was entertaining. You didn't want to take your eyes off it from start to finish. Whereas this fight, Harlem Eubank, Jack Catterall, as Turki was saying, it was a Jerry and Jerry fight. You're watching it and you're like, what am I actually doing here? And Turki being the guy who essentially decides who gets the big paydays in Riyadh, the Riyadh season shows more so, who's on the Ring magazine shows, he's the guy who you want to make a good impression with. Even if you're an up-and-coming fighter, remember Mark Chamberlain was someone who Turki was very, very big on at one point. The fact that he's looking at you and wanting you on your shows is a good thing, right? The fact that he's looking at your fights and saying, this isn't boxing, is a really, really bad thing. And what he's essentially saying, a bit of a long-winded one here, but what he's essentially saying is he wants to see boxing and entertainment. That's essentially what he's saying. And I think that that's something that a lot of the fans are a bit annoyed at, I want to say. Maybe they're a bit annoyed more so with the fact that Turki is being somewhat dictatorial in his position in boxing, in a sense that, he is the one dangling the carrot and he's saying, you dance to my tune. If you don't dance to my tune, you don't end up on one of my shows. And by dancing to his tune, it doesn't mean you're actually simping for Turki and, you're saying this, that, and the other. Essentially, he wants you to box a certain way. And if you box that certain way, there you go. You get the rewards you get on some of his shows. He, at the end of the day, did the Times Square show, which had two terrible fights on it. And Teofimo Lopez versus Barbosa wasn't an absolute spectacle or anything like that, but it was just a lot better than the other two fights that preceded it. Or actually that followed, I should say. And, it made for bad viewing. And then Canelo Skull, that was just diabolical. It really was. So Turki obviously seeing the amount of money that was being forked out. And at the end of the day, it's putting eyes on the sport of boxing. And if you are trying to build the sport of boxing and you're seeing that, you're tuning in and you're thinking this is going to be a great spectacle and you see that, Canelo Skull, well, it's not a good look. And he is trying to increase, eyes on Saudi Arabia. I guess you could say it is sport washing at the end of the day. I mean, if you look at the WWE, they're doing shows over there now on an almost regular basis. There's talk of a WrestleMania going over there and stuff like that. There's a lot going on over there, and they want eyes on this. They want eyes on their brand, essentially. They want eyes on the sport. They want the good eyes. They don't want people looking at a show over there and thinking, well, that was crap, I'm never going to watch that again. And that, I guess, is what Turkey is going on about. Do I agree with him on the fight itself, saying that this was not boxing? Well, no, it was boxing. It was just, that's a Jack Catterall fight, unfortunately, and I don't mean this to be a video knocking Jack Catterall. I'll leave that to other people to do. But, what do you expect at the end of the day? I've watched Jack Catterall since the Queensberry days, since the very early Queensberry days, and you could probably count on one hand the amount of compelling fights the guy has been in. So, look, I'm a boxing YouTuber. If he's in a fight that's competitive or that's got some significance, like last night's fight, I'll do a video on it, most likely. But if I wasn't a boxing, I'll give you an example. If I wasn't a boxing YouTuber, last night I would not have watched that. I would have went out last night. I would have done something other than watch that fight. I would have just caught the results on X or something like that. That is just Jack. That's just the way he is. He's just been like that for years, I will never forget that fight he had with O'Hara Davis for all the wrong reasons. And O'Hara Davis can shoulder some of the blame in that fight as well, because he didn't do much either. But that really was the start of, oh God, this is what we're dealing with Jack Catterall. It was awful. It was one of the worst fights I've ever seen. Horrible fight. Truly awful. And it's kind of consistently been that way with him. So I got what I expected in the nicest way from what was happening last night. I think with Turkey, he's looking for more fighters to be on his Riyadh shows, and again, I think you have to sing to his tune. If you're going to be an out boxer, you have to have offense as well. You can't just be defensive, move, step to the left, just throw a little don't hit me punch, stuff like that. You have to have some real offense as well. And you can do that. There are plenty of boxers who are very, very good technically, who are defensively sound, who are defensively minded, but they can actually let offense go. They really can. I think, I'm not saying this is Jack Catterall necessarily, but if you look at someone like a Devin Haney, Shakur, people like that, and I've said this for the longest time about these guys, they're very defensively minded. They don't throw a lot of shots, and their fights are very boring to watch. But why is that? These are modelling their style off an old Floyd Mayweather. And that's the thing I just can never really understand. Adrian Broner was another one back in the... Although Adrian Broner was a bit more... Well, he was more aggressive. He definitely was. But they're modelling their style off an old Floyd Mayweather who was fighting at a weight that he really, in reality, shouldn't have been fighting at. Floyd was up at 147 pounds. He was never a natural 147 pounder. He was defensively sound. He was up there in his 30s. And, he would still let shots go. Floyd Mayweather would. But he knew he couldn't hurt these guys. He knew he would have to rely on his better defense and his better boxing ability and his better long-range boxing. And again, he was older. He was older and he was smaller than most of the guys he was fighting at 147 pounds and 154 whenever he went kind of catch weighty up there. But these guys now, Devin Haney, Shakur, Jack Catterall, they're in the right weight. They're young enough. They're the same size, but they're fighting like an old Floyd Mayweather. And Mayweather was able to bring eyes to the sport for a variety of reasons, not necessarily because of his style. And I think that a lot of these guys look at what Floyd did in terms of getting people watching, getting pay-per-view buys, fighting like that and thinking, well, he can do it, why can't I? It's very different nowadays. And most fight fans nowadays, they do want to see entertainment. At the end of the day, there's nothing worse than building to a big event. And I think Times Square was a big event. I was looking forward to it. I was curious to see what it would look like. And for it to fall flat, when people say he put me to sleep, I mean, that was a Friday night and it was on Eastern time in the States. So it was on a little bit more reasonable for us over here in the UK. And yeah, Devin Haney literally put me to sleep. So I get what Turkey is saying. That's not a good look when stuff like that happens. So Turkey really, putting his foot in it and saying, this is how it's going to be and this is how it's going to go. So let's wait and see. Will we start to see more fighters adapt who would maybe naturally be a safety first? Shakur Stevenson is fighting this coming Friday or this coming Saturday. Will he be more, aggressive in this fight than we're used to seeing him? Let's wait and see, knowing that Turkey will be watching and knowing that this is what Turkey wants to see. Okay, well, I guess I got to do something different. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed the video, people. Smash the like button if you could. Hit subscribe, of course, as always, if you haven't already. And until next time, I will leave it there. Peace.